These are my predictions for the UFC 317 main card. I'm only doing the main card. I'm not a casual, but I'm also not going to sit here and give you a 30-minute analysis on every fighter on the prelim card. So let's get straight into it. First off, I just want to thank you guys for 50 subscribers. I've only just recently started this channel, so let's go for that. First fight on the main card is Payton Talbot versus Felipe Lima. Obviously, Payton Talbot's coming off the loss to Barcelos. It was quite a disappointing loss. I feel like he came in with a lot of hype, and I think a lot of people jumped off that train once he lost, which is fair enough, but you also look at how young Payton Talbot is, and to fight someone like Barcelos very early on in his UFC career. Barcelos is a veteran. He's not a prospect by any means, and I feel like maybe that was a little bit too early of a step for Talbot. But this Felipe Lima fight really reminds me of Sean O'Malley versus Moutinho's. I don't know, two kind of prospects. One's a little bit crafty. I really do see Payton Talbot getting this win. Obviously, Felipe Lima is quite, explosive and good on the feet, but I really do feel like Payton Talbot's going to be a little bit too fast for him, a little bit too slick as well. I don't see it being a knockout, but I do see Payton Talbot sort of, dominating the fight throughout at least 3 or 4 rounds, and the ref stopping it to a TKO, and then Payton Talbot's going to walk off an oral farm like he didn't just get smudged a couple months ago. So that's my pick to kick off the main card. Alright, next fight we've got Beneil Dariush taking on Renato Moicano. Now, Moicano was literally the only person that made this press conference interesting. I'm going to make a video talking about that. I've personally attended a couple of UFC press conferences as media, so I've got a bit more insight as to why it runs the way it does. Both these guys coming off a loss. Obviously, Beneil is coming off, a couple knockout losses in a row. Also, Beneil rocked up to the press conference like he just woke up. I don't know what bro is doing. I know the general consensus is that Beneil is, past his prime and that he's washed. But when you actually look at it, they're both the same age. Only thing I will say about Dariush, I feel like he's taken way too much damage throughout his career, and I think that's going to play a massive factor in this fight. That being said, though, I do feel like they are quite even no matter where this fight goes. I actually think this fight will get performance of the night strictly just because the scrambles will be sick. I think it'll stay standing majority of the fight just because they'll cancel each other out on the ground. But like I said, man, I think Dariush has taken way too much damage throughout his career, and I think he's at the tail end. And I think Moicano, yes, he's at the same age as Beneil, but he hasn't taken anywhere near close to same damage as him. So I'm going to give this to Moicano via unanimous decision. I think this fight's going to be an all-out war. And then we're in for a 5-minute post-fight speech about the American government. But now moving on to the next fight, we've got Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van. To be honest, I didn't know too much about Joshua Van before this fight came up. I feel like he's quite a low-key fighter, goes under the radar. But when you look at this fight, it's kind of that typical veteran versus up-and-coming prospect. Joshua Van is on a 3-fight win streak, but one thing I will say about that is last time he was on a 3-fight win streak, he lost his next 2. So you know me, I fall for the prophecies. Who was Royval's last fight? I'm asking my producer. Bro's last fight was 2 cancelled fights against Manel Cup. Alright, so he's on a 2-fight win streak. For whatever reason, I thought he was coming off a loss. I do think that Brandon Royval is just going to be a little bit too good for Joshua Van at this point in his career. Man, he's only like 22, 23 years old. So I feel like Royval is just going to have way too much experience on him. I think he's going to be better than him everywhere. I think Joshua Van's got a lot of explosive power. So I could see him, maybe getting lucky and landing a big shot. But I do kind of see this being a masterclass over 5 rounds. So I'm going to give this to Brandon Royval via dominant unanimous decision. Alright, now moving on to my favorite fight of the card. Forgot his name for a second. Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France. As you guys would know from my last video, Kai Kara-France is actually my best friend. We went to school together. Again, look at this photo. I'm just going to say I'm biased, and I'm going to put the house on Kai Kara-France, even though I don't have a house. I think if this fight stays standing, that Kai Kara-France definitely has the advantage. I think Pantoja's strategy will definitely be to get him down to the ground early on in the fight and try to tire him out. But I think Kai's going to be expecting that. I think Kai's going to aura farm and do his tongue thing. I could weirdly even seeing him land an uppercut on Pantoja as he's diving for the legs. That being said, Pantoja has a granite chin. I think if this fight does go to decision though, that Pantoja will have the edge, strictly because he's been in more 5-round fights. He's got better cardio than Kai in my opinion, but I'm going to pick Kai Kara-France via TKO in the 3rd or 4th round. And then we're going to get an emotional post-fight speech. Moving on to the headline of the night, Ilia Topuria versus Ice Spice's husband, Charles Du Bronx Oliveira. I made a video on this yesterday talking in depth about this fight and why I believe that Charles Oliveira has a lot of advantages against Topuria in this fight. And someone commented Poodlehead Brainrot. I think they're calling me the poodle head and my content brain rot. So as I said in that video yesterday, I think the general consensus is that Topuria is going to smoke Oliveira, which to be honest, I don't believe. I think that Oliveira's got the advantage pretty much everywhere in this fight. I think he's got the height, the reach, and I do believe that if Oliveira comes in with the same game plan that he had against Chandler, which in my opinion is a very similar opponent to someone like Topuria, and just keeps Topuria at distance, and when Ilia does close the distance, I think Charles can just, you know, do that zesty clinch, and I feel like it will just minimize Topuria's boxing and minimize, you know, the tools that Topuria usually uses. When you look at Topuria's fighting style, his main weapons of choice is his boxing and his leg kicks, and when you look at all of Charles Oliveira's fights, you know, he's got one of the best leg checks. I do also think this fight's going to be quite similar to how Gaethje and Oliveira played out, except I don't think Oliveira will finish Topuria. I think it will be, you know, a unanimous decision. I think Oliveira will win 3 rounds to 2, but I do see Oliveira getting knocked down sometime in this fight, and like I said, I believe Ilia is going to try and aura farm and try to finish him on the ground, but man, Oliveira's total shell is too good for that. But yeah, I'm going to say Charles Oliveira by a unanimous decision. I think it's going to be quite a close fight, and those are my main card predictions for this weekend. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you guys do subscribe, drop a like on this video, and thank you again for 50 subscribers. I will see you guys this Sunday with my reaction. Peace.